My name is Nicholas Santantonio. I'm the small grains breeder here at Virginia Tech. I've been here for about 4 years now, so finally growing into my boots a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the crop we had here in Virginia last year. Um, we had yields that were better than most people had seen in a very long time. It was cool weather during grain fill, but because of that, the crop was real slow to mature. It was probably a week and a half behind. And just as the crop matured for most people, we got about 2 straight weeks worth of rain. Some growers were, especially growers that had an early variety, were able to get in there and get some of it harvested. I don't know that anyone got all of it harvested, but because of that, our crop here, at least in the eastern Virginia, got rained on for about 10 days, and falling numbers were real bad, and people were pretty upset because they had a great yield and relatively low quality. So I think we've seen acres go down, certainly here in the northern neck this last year because of that to some extent, which is a little frustrating. You have one of your best years, and that's the year where the weather just doesn't want to cooperate when it comes time to get it out of the field. Because of that, a lot of growers have really transitioned to using cover crops as opposed, putting in a cover crop as opposed to putting in a winter small grain. There's there's a lot of programs out there that are paying growers to put in, a cover, and then they, all they got to do is get it established by a certain date, and they're good. Which means that we've seen a loss of acreage because they don't have to then put down. There's no fungicides, there's no nitrogen. You don't have to put hours on your equipment, no diesel, and you get a paycheck at the end of the next year. So I think that the cover crop program is probably doing the most harm to acreage, at least here in Virginia. I would certainly like to see some revision to that, just to keep small grains in our rotation and part of our system. So I'm going to talk about a few varieties that we released this year, and then I'm going to transition a little bit to talk. Well, actually, why don't I? Before I talk about varieties, there's 2 things that I've noticed going on. One, some of you may notice that there's a lot of yellow and purple leaves out there. That is we believe is due to BYD. So everybody has been calling this BYD for a very long time. We've been scoring it as BYD, or barley yellow dwarf virus, for a very long time. This year, there's something unique going on. It is extremely heavy and is extremely uniform. And there have been some reports of varieties that have consistently tested as resistant to BYD that are no longer showing that resistance this year. I've also heard people say the exact opposite. They say, oh yeah, my line that's resistant is resistant again this year. So we're not 100% certain we know what's going on. I've been working with several people across the state, including our new small grains extension specialist, Olga Walsh, who I was just looking at a second. There she is. And a new pathologist at the Eastern Shore, Doug Higgins, who's here. He's going to talk a little bit about that today, so I don't want to give away everything here. But just to know that we do have a big problem with what appears to be BYD. We're not 100% certain that's our only problem, and that there may be something else that's also causing this. So we're doing a lot of work to figure out what that is at the moment. The other thing I will comment on is this year we had relatively hot and dry weather right around flowering. And so the scab forecast was very low. That's generally a good thing for people. But the problem is that because people weren't putting down that last, or that fungicide application, or some folks weren't putting down that last fungicide application, we had leaf rust roll in. And because leaf rust has not really been a priority breeding goal since we've had scab, because when we started to get scab, everyone was spraying for scab, and that was, the residual fungicide from that scab application was largely controlling any issues you might have with leaf rust. But now that we've got, if you have a year like this, where, maybe you can get away with not spraying for scab, you got to watch out for those other late season diseases. Leaf rust can result in pretty significant yield loss. More importantly, it results in pretty significant reduction in test weight. So, a lot of our varieties are resistant to leaf rust. My predecessor, Carl Griffey, worked a lot on leaf rust, and we have excellent leaf rust resistance in our program. So if you can, focus on varieties that have that basal level resistance so you don't have to worry about it. last year, and I meant to change the sign. So last year we released a public variety. This is the first public variety we've had out for about 4 years. The last one was Liberty 5658, saw kind of mixed success. Before that, it was Hilliard. I think Hilliard came out in 2015, I think was the year of release. And it's still being grown in some areas, although not so much here in the northern neck. But yeah, so this variety we named VT Pittman after Bob, Bob Pittman, who was the farm superintendent here for, I think he said 19 years before Joseph took over about 5 or 6 years ago. 7 years ago? I don't remember exactly. 6. Okay, yeah. So that's who we named it after. This variety has FHB1. It's the most important scab locust that we have in wheat right now. It prevents the spread of the infection. Once infection happens at a floret, FHB1 tends to reduce the spread of that infection inside the head. So you'll end up with one spikelet that gets infected, but not all of them. And it doesn't, it helps to keep the rest of the head from being killed. So it has FHB1, also high resistance to leaf rust, moderately resistant stripe rust, and has good mildew has moderate mildew resistance, a little bit more than a sister line that we released the year before as a private license. This year we released 4 varieties, 16 VDH SRWO 3-023, 15 VTK1-101. So these two right here, both of these varieties have the H13 gene for Hessian fly. So here in the northern neck, we really don't have a problem getting planted after the fly free date. But as we are getting more and more mild winters, we think that this could be a problem. So we have really focused the breeding program on making sure that we have good Hessian fly resistance, because we expect that as we see these more mild winters, we may see more, that the Hessian fly free date gets pushed back further and further and further to the point where it may not be viable to actually plant afterward. So yeah, both of these lines have FHB1. One is onless, one is on. Both of them have good resistance to leaf rust and powdery mildew. Those are our biggest problems here on the farm, so those are the ones that we tend to have the best resistance to. 023 is a little taller, did particularly well in 2021. It was entered into the Uniform Eastern across about 19 site locations, along with about, I can't remember, it was 20 or 30 other entries from other breeding programs across the eastern US, and it came out as #1. Its sister line was also evaluated in 2021 in the Uniform Southern across 17 locations, I believe, and it came out in first place as well. Now, the only reason we didn't release that one, its sister line, was because it got a little bit of what we sometimes call pseudo black chaff. You'll see a little bit of darkening on the heads, and it's very visually unpleasant, despite having no real effect on the crop. So it's funny how you can have these traits that it's more important that they look pretty than what the actual effect on yield is. Anyway, but yeah, this one doesn't get it, so we're happy about that. 101. This variety was #1 in the Virginia state trials last year. It's also placed #1 on the 3-year average across 2021, 2022, and 2023. You'll see it's a little shorter. It's very uniform, and it has kind of a blue look to it. I'm really excited about this. Excellent resistance to rust, mildew, and moderately resistant to scab. And really, again, both of these, the most important piece, I think, is the Hessian fly resistance. So these will travel well, particularly this one should travel well, down into the Carolinas, I'm hoping. Moving on, we've breeding lines here. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of stuff. We've put some information about them. You'll notice that the yields are a little high. Like I said, last year was a very good year, so a lot of these are above 100. Like, for example, 101 is about 126 bushels per acre, and that's in our trials. So your mileage may vary. But we do report the percent of the mean there so that you can kind of get a feeling for where they are in terms of other varieties that are being evaluated. Kind of shifting down a little bit. This year, VA19 FHB 36. This variety has done relatively well. I believe it's 10th in the 2-year average in Virginia, but it has done particularly well in Missouri. So we entered it in the Missouri state test last year, and it did quite well there. So we're hoping that we're going to send this one out west, or west for us, I suppose, not the western U.S. That one has it's a little on the taller side, but has good test weight and is quite seems to perform well in a lot of different environments. So yeah, so 1936. And then the last one we released this year, this variety is an onless variety, and so let me a little back up here. When I started here at Virginia Tech, one of my goals was to start using genomic information for breeding decision making on a routine basis. So all of our lines now get genotyped with genome-wide DNA markers. That allows us to use that information along with phenotypes to predict the performance of lines, either observed lines in unobserved environments, but it also allows us to predict performance of unobserved lines in unobserved environments to some extent. And so what's interesting about this one was has consistently for the last 3 years ended up at the very top of our prediction model. And so we've used it as a parent quite often. Good rust and mildew resistance. I feel like I've said that 6 times now. It also has FHB1, so it's got resistance to scab. And we're pretty excited about this one just because it keeps popping up year after year. When we run new data and we do new analysis, this always ends up at the top. So we're hopeful that we will see that some of the progeny from this do particularly well too. However, and I'll just a small caveat: performance per se is not necessarily a good indicator of being a good parent. We've seen that in the past. Hilliard, for example, has good performance, and it's an excellent parent and has been used by most of the public breeding programs in the eastern U.S. Shirley, on the other hand, also has excellent performance. It's an older line that is still being grown. Shirley does not make a very good parent. And so we believe that sometimes what happens is we make a cross and we develop a line that has a certain combination of genes, right, alleles of genes, that give it an edge. But when you make a cross with that, you're then breaking up that combination and you lose that edge. So we do see that sometimes we have a parent that's predicted to do very well, and then it doesn't perform well in crosses. So I'm just starting to evaluate some of the crosses we made with this. I made crosses with this in my first year, after it had only been observed in 2 yield plots. Made a bunch of crosses with it. Then I now have those crosses in yield plots over there in the jungle. So I don't know how many of you got back back in the woods to see the state OVT, but yeah. So we've got some first year trials out there now with lines that have this as a parent, as well as the 101. Actually, my favorite family right now is a cross I made between that short blue 15 VTK1-101 and VT Pittman. They look wonderful.